Welcome to the latest Seahawks Draft Blog instant reaction live stream. Rob Staton and Adam Nathan here. No Robbie today, but very Merry Christmas to Robbie if he watches this one back or is watching us now. We're going to get into this loss against the Chiefs. The Seahawks are now 1-5 in their last 6 games. That promising 6-3 start to the season in the first half of the season feels like an absolute age ago. So, Adam, what did you make of that then? The Seahawks losing 24-10 to the Chiefs.
Oh, there's so much to get into. I think overall, and we probably see this in soccer a lot, if you're going away to the best team in the league, you kind of turn up expecting your backside handed to you and you lose and you go home or whatever. The frustrating thing was that we got our backsides handed to us by a team that played dreadfully by the Chiefs' high standards, I would say. Offensively, they were bang average outside of a few, moments of individual magic that you're always going to get. But I text someone halfway through the game saying that the Chiefs look like they're at practice and they're just winning. And I think that's what I'm struggling with the most, in the sense that the point of this is to try and win a championship at some point. And I've been really positive, I think, about how the team is growing and how it's going and how we're going forward and the puzzle they're putting together. But I'm probably 1 or 2 more losses away here from just wondering, what are we doing here with this direction, and is this working? And I really didn't want to be there at this point. And I didn't think I would be at 6-3, but 1-5 is 1-5. And the fears that many people had at the start of the year that this team wasn't going to be up to it, well, that's what 1-5 looks like, unfortunately. So I don't know. Yeah, it's going to be a back and forth. And what did you make of it? Because I'm pretty flat, I have to say.
Well, I just wrote on the blog that it felt like I was watching a preseason game in the first half, because it just felt a saunter, really, for the Chiefs. They never really got out of second gear. The Seahawks didn't really throw a punch in that first half. And I think what I expect is going to be as the days go on, maybe not tomorrow because it's Christmas Day, but as sort of we get into next week, Adam, I'm sure that people are going to be looking for the moral victories. I think we saw a bit of it after the Niners game. Oh, it wasn't as bad as we thought. And I think we're going to see some of that again here. Just because it wasn't 40 points to 3, people are going to talk themselves into this being an okay performance. People are going to talk about it being an okay performance because they ran the ball in the second half. But what I would say to that is this, what really, really irritated me was the interview at half time where Pete Carroll said, we've got to run the ball. We've got to run the ball. And then they ran the ball, and you're thinking, okay, that's all well and good. You're running the ball when you're trailing 17 points to 3. If you're going to run the ball and keep the game close, you have to do that from the first quarter, not the third quarter. They were chasing the game at that point, and they're trying to run the ball and establish the run. The third downs, they were an absolute disgrace on third downs today. I think it was something like 1 out of 11. I just didn't enjoy the game at all, Adam. I never felt like the Seahawks were going to win. I think it's a complete. People are celebrating the fact that the Lions got their arses handed to them, and the Giants just lost by a field goal. I'm actually a little bit deflated about that, because I don't want this team to squeeze into the playoffs as a really bad 7th seed. And yet there's a distinct possibility, because the Seahawks have beaten the Lions, and one of the Giants games was a tie, and that might come back to bite them, that they'll end up being a team that squeezes through in the end. I don't have any interest at them. They've got a horrible Jets team coming up next, and then a horrible beaten up backups Rams team. There's every chance that the Seahawks are going to back the way into the playoffs here. And I just don't, I'm not excited. I should be excited about that. I should be excited about the prospect of a playoff run, and I am not. I'm just got no excitement from this team. They need a complete overhaul in the trenches. Again, the Chiefs just dominated up front on both sides of the ball. Geno Smith had very little time. Patrick Mahomes had a lot more time. I thought the Chiefs played like crap, but they've been playing like crap for the last couple of weeks. They had to go to overtime against the Texans last week. And 2 weeks ago, they blew a handsome lead against the Broncos and nearly lost in Denver. So they're not playing well. And they, as you perfectly put it, they didn't play well and won 24-10. That is, I've had enough, Adam. I've had enough. I've been veering towards that. I want to see something new. I want some new ideas. I want some new people. I want some new decision makers. I want a new direction. It's been great, but it's time for me. It's 13 seasons now, I think it is, that Pete Carroll's been here. I don't think you can just go on and on forever. I listened to some fans' defence of Carroll staying, and quite frankly, it's ridiculous. Some of the stuff I've heard this last week on in some places. I'm just ready for something new, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think a coach has a divine right to stay forever, and I don't think Pete Carroll will want to stay forever. I'm ready to see something different. I've just watched the Vikings pull off another come from behind win. What are they like? Are they like a 12-win team now or something like that, with a couple of games to go?
They're 11-0 in one possession games.
You know, they get a new coach and it changes things. I'm not saying that's necessarily going to happen for Seattle, but there are teams out there that have benefited. The Giants, the Vikings, the Dolphins, benefiting from coaching changes. I'm ready for it. I'm ready for it. I don't want to make this necessarily a Pete Carroll thing, Adam. I'm sorry. It's just a thing that's on the top of my mind. This is no disrespect to Pete Carroll, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, despite what people think. I'm just ready for something else.
Well, it's hard not to make it that, because the team is ultimately built in exactly the image Pete Carroll wants it to be. Ironically, not on defense, where he's just seemed to just hand that over to someone else and say, well, that's fine, you can deal with that, which does seem like quite a strange thing. But it's funny, like I'm seeing people during the game saying, oh, we just need to get Jalen Carter and then, we'll be fine. But I think we've gone away from that. I think 4 or 5 weeks ago, we were talking. And again, I don't think it's a problem to have, changing expectations as the year goes on. But I think earlier in the year, we were saying, look, get Jalen Carter, plug that one gap that we think we have, and then maybe we've got something really to go for next year. I mean, you'll know better than me, but for my money, we're maybe one Denver win away from Carter and Anderson being distant memories for us in the draft. And at that point, you've got 4 high picks, and I don't know, there's enough holes there for me that I just think you take the best player available in each position and don't worry so much about, we need to get this player in and then we'll be fine. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And, they haven't got that many injuries. Three fairly important players missing today. But, if you miss Al Woods, Ryan Neal and Tyler Lockett that much, there's roster problems. They need a lot of work in a lot of areas. And it's quite frustrating because if it continues in this direction with the same people, I'm not going to say they're going to fritter away their capital, because they might pick good players like they did last year. But it's becoming a tough watch. And I can't believe that 5 weeks down the road, we're just not enjoying it to this point.
So you made a comment which I noticed on the Seahawks UK Facebook page, which was incredibly pertinent, because people were saying, I think it was a discussion about whether you go for a quarterback or a defensive lineman. And, this is going to be a discussion that carries on going up to the draft. You said, and you've kind of made that point again, that if Denver win even one more game, you might not be in range for Jalen Carter and Will Anderson. And so at the moment, Denver are the 3rd overall pick. Chicago is 2nd overall, and they get into games and then just fall apart, and they're going to finish with the 2nd overall pick. The Rams and the Broncos have got the same record, as have the Arizona Cardinals. The Rams obviously play the Broncos. If the Broncos win tomorrow, that's it, really. I think that'll probably be it. The Broncos are going to lose to the Chiefs, I would guess, in Kansas City, with the Chiefs still have got a chance of the number 1 seed. And then they'll finish with the Chargers, who may or may not have qualified for the playoffs at that point, may well rest players. But I just don't see, if they beat the Rams, I don't see where the next Rams win is coming from. And ditto Arizona, who wants the 3rd quarterback. So you could end up picking 5th overall, and you're just not going to get. I mean, even if Chicago trades down, if you're 5th, the chances of getting Carter are nil, really. And Will Anderson, very good player, but I kind of feel like you've got players like that already, and you're not doing anything with them. So, like, what do you want to just throw another? Is Will Anderson and Jenner and Nwosu, Darrell Taylor and Boya Maffei? What difference is it going to make in this scheme? None of them are rushing the passer with any great consistency. And if you can't get Jalen Carter, people have just sort of the third pick or the 2nd pick, whatever it's, but the Denver pick has become a means for people just to sort of go, well, we don't need to, we can just chalk all this down to rebuild team. We've got that pick, and that's going to help us rebuild the D-line, and then everything will be okay. But once the good players are gone and you're actually left with, well, who's left? And in that top 10, and I'm sure people will make, Miles Murphy, pussycat. Brian Brissy has had all sorts of health issues, has never shown consistent form at Clemson. Tyree Wilson, I can't bang I like him, but he plays in fits and starts, and he isn't a top 10 pick for me, but he may end up being a top 10 pick because there's nobody else. You're going to be fighting against taking one of these quarterbacks because you just, I don't know if you don't take one, because I think ultimately if you're fifth and the quarterbacks are still there, that's the option you've probably got to go with, because they're going to produce the value. So I don't think it's going to fix. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm rambling. I just feel, to me, we're just waffling on about the same things because it's 1-5. I just want to see something new. I want to see if somebody else can get a tune out of these defensive players. I want to see some different ideas, some different approaches. I don't want to see the same thing over and over again. I've kind of made some notes. I made these notes, Adam, before the game. And I want to read them to you and get your reaction to this, because I'm a bit bored of hearing the excuse making that Seahawks fans roll through. And look, we've got a super chat. And Sean, thank you for the super chat. I'm going to come to that as soon as I've done this. And if you've got a super chat, really appreciate it, especially at this time of year. So the first point I would make, when you start a season 6-3 and then go on a 1-5 run, that isn't good enough. There is no excuse for that unless you've got a major back-breaking injury situation, like you've lost a franchise quarterback, or you've done what the Rams have done, lost your quarterback, your franchise receiver, and your elite defensive tackle. If that happens, it's somewhat justifiable. So there's no justification, because Seattle hasn't had that, to go 1-5. And their only win was against the Rams backups. And that was a nail-biting last gasp win. Not good enough. People, Adam, are saying, well, what did you expect? You always expected a rebuild. They're just doing what you thought they were going to do now. Well, not necessarily, because your expectations change. It's too simplistic to just say they've just become the team you expected. I thought they'd win 6 games this season, and they've won 7. So the difference isn't that big right now. They may end up with 7 wins, and therefore, what's the big deal? But going into the season, I expected nothing from Geno Smith, and he's played better than Russell Wilson's last 2 years in Seattle. If you'd have told me that Geno Smith was going to play this way in the summer, I would have adjusted my expectations. So because Geno Smith has been better, our expectations adjust, and therefore to go 1-5 while Geno Smith didn't play very well again today, but while he has been playing this well, your expectations grow, and they grow to a point where you cannot expect 1-5 and to go 0-4 against the NFC South. That's just a fact. Failing to make the playoffs when you start 6-3 in this NFC conference is bad, because it's a bad conference. There are 7 seeds available now. You've got no excuse not to make it when you start 6-3. And if the Seahawks miss out on the playoffs, Adam, then this is the big one for me, because I have heard so many people say, how can you get rid of Pete Carroll? He's got X number of wins over the last 10 years or 13 years or however far people want to go. Here's the reality of it. Here's the stat that means something. If they don't make the playoffs this year, in the last 8 seasons, they will have 3 playoff wins. In 8 seasons. And those 3 playoff wins, the win in Minnesota, thanks to Blair Walsh botching that kick. They shouldn't have won that game. They beat the Detroit Lions in Seattle in the wild card. And they beat the Philadelphia Eagles in the wild card, who lost their quarterback in the first quarter and had to play a 40-year-old backup who they basically plucked off the street a couple of weeks earlier. They're their 3 playoff wins in the last 8 years, Adam. I want to believe in a team that can go and contend. I didn't expect them to contend this year, but I want to believe in this setup being able to produce a contender. The Super Bowl season is 9 years ago now. They have not been able to recreate a proper championship caliber team with one reset in 2018, and they're going through another one now. I want to see something different.
Yeah, I mean, the natural reaction will be careful what you wish for. Look at all these other teams in the NFL that are just mediocre and not doing anything, but you don't need to fall asleep for too long to wake up and find yourself as one of those teams. And at the moment, the Seahawks look like they're going to have back-to-back years of a losing record. Now, in a league where in 2 to 3 years, I reckon you can take yourself from rock bottom to the top, which is basically what the Bengals have done just by drafting well and coaching well. Like, how long do I have to be careful what I wish for when the last championship? I mean, 16 teams in 8 years will get to the championship round. So, like, by the law of averages, you should make it once in 8 years. Well, we've not done that. So, and I know that's hugely reductive, but all that people seem to cling to is, the grass may not be greener. It may not be. But right now, if the goal is to win a championship, we don't appear to be on that path. And I hate doing this because I've said before, like, I've definitely lost listeners on my own show for being too negative on Pete Carroll. And I did that in 2017, 2018. Not to say, like, look at me, like I got it right. At that point, I thought this isn't going to work. And, I guess he had every right to be stuck with. But how many more years are people happy to keep doing this? Because do you feel that there's going to be demonstrative changes with the same people? And if so, why? I mean, if anyone in the comments does think so, educate us. I'd be really happy to hear the counter argument, but I just don't get what the plan is to make this a championship team. And like, vibes and making people happy in the locker room will only take you that far.
What you said there about people saying be careful what you wish for and stuff like that, I've had a lot of that. There's been a lot of you can't get rid of him. Who could do it? Essentially the argument is it's the nobody else can do this job other than Pete Carroll fallacy, which is palpably nonsense. I mean, it's just not true. There are other people. You take a risk with it's a risk to stay with Carroll. It's a risk to move on from Carroll. Everything comes with a risk factor. I just don't. I personally don't think that stuff that has happened in the past means that you just get a job forever. I mean, sometimes when I listen to these people, I think that, really, well, why don't we just sign Pete Carroll to a lifetime contract? If it's as simple as that, you might as well just make the commitment now and just say he will never ever leave until he either passes on or decides that he wants to retire. This is ridiculous. I think we want to, and I think there's a logical argument to be made for the people who just want to see something different. This is not a personal thing. We've got a tremendous amount of respect for Pete Carroll. People accuse it. Whenever you talk about this, Adam, you get accused of doing clickbait. And I would just urge people to go and look at my YouTube views and my own channel, because when the Seahawks lose, the views are a third of what they are of when the Seahawks win. People want positivity. If this was about clickbait, I would just put Seahawks fantastic in unfortunate defeat to the Chiefs, and I would get more viewers. People want positivity. I want to be positive. I think if there's anything, we have been very positive at times this season. I did a whole video about admitting I was wrong about Geno Smith. This is not a desire on my behalf or Adam's behalf or Robbie's behalf or anybody else to be negative for the sake of it. I'm desperate for the Seahawks to win. I just don't. How many times can you see it? Pete Carroll's up. I'm seeing quotes from Curtis in the live chat. Quotes from Pete Carroll. We've just got to be better. We've just got to do this better. How do you stop this? We've just got to be better. We've got to do this better. It's the same thing every single week. It's the same thing every season. The defense isn't any good season after season after season. The pass rush isn't good enough season after season after season. The running game's too inconsistent season after season after season. Eventually, you just got to go, I can't keep watching this. I want to see something different. And I'm willing to take a chance on whatever comes next being bad for it to be different in a good way. And as I've said before, there are plenty of you could make all sorts of arguments. Somebody made an argument that, look at Josh McDaniels, for example, in Las Vegas and how that's gone badly. Look at Nathaniel Hackett. And that's fine. You by all means make those arguments. But you also say Nick Sirianni he didn't even run the offense in Indianapolis. It was Frank Reich around the offense. Nick Sirianni was his offensive coordinator. He gets a job in Philadelphia. He goes up on the podium and absolutely shat himself. He looked like a nervous wreck doing his first press conference. Here he sits here now in charge of a 13-1 Philadelphia Eagles team. You can make that argument for that. O'Connell in Minnesota, Mike McDaniel's done a good job. You can run through, there are good and bad appointments every single year. You can't live in fear of a bad appointment and therefore refuse to ever make a decision. That's not how it works. I'm just ready to see something different. And as we've talked about a lot on the channel, and nobody else is really talking about this, I suspect Pete Carroll might be close to that point as well. I think he will be seriously considering whether he wants to just keep going. People assume just because he's got those draft picks that he wants to keep going. You don't know how a person feels. You can only bang your head against the wall so many times before you go, I'm gonna sit this one out. Super chats. Love your work, Rob. If you could ask Pete one question and he had to answer honestly and at length, what would you ask? Well, this is a great question, actually, Sean, because there's quite a few things I'd like to ask. How close, if you had to answer, I'd say, how close are you considering to calling it a day? If it was about the team, the state of the team, I would probably put something to, since I'd go back to whenever the last season they had a great defense, and I would sort of list the number of seasons, whatever it is, 6, 7 seasons since you've had, a top 10 defense. How much responsibility do you take for not being able to create that? Can you explain why you've not been able to create that defense despite the massive resource spend that has gone on that group? Something along those lines. I'd like him to explain why his team, because they built a championship roster off the back of a great running back and a great defense, and they've never been able to recreate that. So I don't know. It's a great question, Sean. I hope I've somewhat answered it, but it's hard to sort of, I typically with something like that, if you told me I was going to speak to Pete Carroll, I'd probably sit there for 6 hours writing down the questions and picking which one I would choose. So it's quite difficult to pin me on the spot on that. But right now it'd be how close to retiring, because I think there's enough talk out there to sort of want to know what the answer is. What would you ask him, Adam? Have you got an idea?
It's a good question, because I think that in a way, without being an all-time pedant, what Pete Carroll honestly thinks about something and what the actual truth is, if we could get out of him with like a truth serum, might be two completely different answers. Because I think Pete's the kind of guy that tells himself stuff so often that he honestly believes that this team is really close to winning a Super Bowl, but we'd need to sort of really get in the back of his brain with some truth serum to find out what he actually thinks. And I would like to know, how close does he think this team is to being a championship team? And I would love to get the real answer, because in a way that's quite illustrative of how much longer he should be given in the job. Because if he thinks it's a year away, get lost, get rid.
Yeah,
because it's not.
It's obviously not.
It's just not, is it? But if you think it's 1 year away and you act as if it is 1 year away, then that's sort of how you end up being mediocre, because you're just trying to put, masking tape over the hole in the dam. And I think we've said a few times that I respect that they're trying to refuel the jet whilst it's in the sky, but it's not gonna work. Well, it certainly hasn't worked really, to the point where I don't think they're closer to winning a championship now as they were 12 months ago. And that's a problem, because that has to be the reason to do this.
And do you know what, just to go back quickly, this just popped into my head and I want to ask you about this, Adam, because people will say, oh, it's a rebuild year, and obviously it is a rebuild year and you've got to go along with that. But given that Geno Smith has played better than Russell Wilson did the last couple of years, and the only notable difference between, let's say, this year's team and last year's team, or the team year before in 2020, is the fact that Bobby Wagner's no longer in the defense. Bobby Wagner didn't play very well last year. Why is this season should be viewed any differently than last year, let's say? Because actually what this team has got now is like an injection of a really good 2022 draft class. And I know they're young players, maybe some of them are hitting a wall. And you can even praise the coaches for putting those players like Tariq Woolen, for example, into a position where they can succeed. But actually, when you actually compare the personnel and the group this year to last year, why should it be viewed so dramatically different, given Geno Smith has played beyond expectation? If Russell Wilson had stayed and they had the top 10 pick and an extra second round pick for whatever reason, Adam, and had done this, we wouldn't have viewed this as a rebuild year. We'd have been viewing this as a reload almost. So I don't really see why we have to view this season that differently to previous years. And it hasn't been good enough this last 6 games. It's 1-5. It's really poor, and it isn't that different, really, is it, to the previous years? We've seen the same issues and the same strengths. If the quarterback can't bail them out, they don't win.
No, I think you're right that it's a really good point. The reason we all thought it would be a bad year is because we assumed we'd get bad quarterback play. If we were told that wasn't going to be the case, then obviously we'd all have said, oh, well, they'll win 8, 9, 10 games, because if your quarterback's good and you've got good players in the majority of positions, you should be okay. One thing that does interest me about watching the offense at the minute is, whereas at the start of the year, I thought there was almost a hubris in that Pete was taking out Russell Wilson, putting in Geno Smith, and it was like he was saying, well, anyone could just drop back, pick out a guy and throw to the open man. And amazingly, for the first 8 games, it worked and everything looked so easy. Why does it all look so hard now? Maybe it's just, as they say, you get tape, the defensive coordinators work you out, but it feels that there must be more to it than that. I mean, I know the offensive line has regressed, and the rookies, their season would have been over 2 weeks ago in college, but I don't understand why or how things have gone from looking so easy. And it was just like backyard football for the first 6 weeks. It was Parkinson, it was Fant, it was Disley. We were talking about the Disley contract. Now I'm thinking, what the hell are they going to do with that $8 million next year?
Yeah, and above all else, we have to remember that Seattle's strength of schedule is absolutely terrible. It's terrible. The teams around them have got much harder strengths of schedule than Seattle has, and that's why they've got 7 wins as well. We've got this super chat here. This is from Damon. Thank you, Damon, for your support again, especially this time of year. I honestly believe Jody Allen is paying attention and think she's bright enough to see change is necessary. I feel John Schneider is handcuffed by Pete Carroll as the VP. That's the problem to me. John Schneider has a lot more power than he used to have. He has more control and more power off the back of what happened last year. I'm fairly confident about that. It's whether or not, Adam, he has the power, because and again, it's people can take Benjamin Albright is not Jay Glazer. So people can take his tweet with a pinch of salt if they wish. But he suggested last week on Twitter that the GM is ready to work with a different coach and has been for some time, although nobody will say it. Now, if John Schneider can go up to Jody, if Jody Allen or if John Schneider has the ear of Jody Allen, if John Schneider is going up there now and going, look, I really think we need to move on, then it could happen. And Pete Carroll is not going to get fired. But it might be a case of, look, it's time to go, Pete, and they do it so that Pete Carroll walks away and takes a break from the game and then plots his next move, whether that's in football or not. I can imagine that. I can imagine. What I don't get, Adam, you tell me if I'm wrong on this. I'm a bit bored of hearing people in the comment section or on Twitter or whatever saying, no, you're wrong. Pete's not going to retire. Because how do you know? And so Jay Glazer literally reported that he was thinking of retiring at the end of the 2017 season. That was 5 years ago. Why wouldn't he consider retiring? Why? Just because of the picks? I don't think Pete Carroll's that selfish that he thinks, no, I'm going to keep those picks to myself. I think if he thinks this is close to the end now, if he's honest with himself and acknowledges this is a massive rebuild, and that the next regime would really benefit from that draft to launch something that is a bigger build than just sort of, we get this draft and we're really good next year. I think it'd be the most opportune time for him to take a step back. He would leave as a hero. Even if they lose the next 2 games, people will go, well done, Pete, appreciate your time. There'll be no ill will there. He can be seen as a legend. He may well get to the Hall of Fame one day. I think it'd be the ideal time to go, rather than what happens if he has the picks, they're awful next year, it gets worse, or if it's the same and people end up baying for him to go. No one wants to be in that situation. You don't want to overstay your welcome. We've always talked about Arsene Wenger, who outstayed his welcome in Arsenal, and then the fans were demanding his head, half of them were. You don't want to get to that, do you? So I think do you sort of see a route whereby a change occurs, or what? Because I think there's, whether it's Schneider influencing Allen or whether it's Carroll just signing his out of day, I think there is. Not saying it will happen, but I think there is.
We had Mike Flood on our show a couple of weeks ago, who works, I think he does a lot of the community stuff and the fan outreach. And he made a point of saying that everything in the building is about competing. And, I know it's a cliche, but when I asked him what that meant, he said something quite interesting in the sense that it was about how do you become better the next day. It wasn't necessarily about wins and losses. It was how do I compete with myself to become better than I was yesterday. And my biggest issue with Pete is that apart from Carl Tater Smith and the odd one of his sons that he's had in, your face says it all. Who is really holding Pete Carroll to account for any of this stuff? Now, look, he runs the show. I run a business, and I don't necessarily have someone in my ear every day asking me what I'm doing better to make my business better. But it's not exactly the same. Well, it's not the same at all. But I do have people around me that will push me on this and question me on that. And I just, I figure you're going to agree with me, given the sort of the Charlie Chaplin mime artistry you've done in the last 30 seconds. But who is there to tell Pete Carroll to do something? Because look, he will always be completely saccharine in press conferences, especially after losses, because protect the team is his number one mantra. And Curtis has done a great job writing up the comments, but ultimately it's all complete BS. There's nothing of any value that he said today, because if he thinks that, then he's not watched the game. So let's just throw all that out together. But Monday morning, a guy called Potato can't be the person that is holding him accountable. There has to be more than that.
A guy called Potato can't be the one to hold him accountable. I mean, look, that will to me is indicative of why change has been needed for a while, and it's perhaps look, I don't want to patronize anybody. It's perhaps the fact that you and I and other people who kind of do this thing, we kind of listen to what Pete Carroll says and we listen to his answers, and maybe the more casual viewer just sort of doesn't. But when he's asked a fantastic question like who holds you account, which is one of the better questions that Pete Carroll's been asked during his time in Seattle, and he struggles for an answer, fumbles around, and then produces Tater. You just think, oh, come on. And look, he's tried everything. He's tried bringing his guys back. Ken Norton. He tried to get the other guy, Gus Bradley back, and he couldn't. So he got Ken Norton back. Brought in Brian Schottenheimer to run his offense and stuff like that. He tried all that, and then that didn't work. And then he's tried to go outside of his tree, and Shane Walden from the McVay, and now Clint Hurt and Sean Desai from the Fangio, and he's tried that, and he's like, well, what do you try next? Like, none of it works. There's one person who's been consistent throughout all this. Now it's time for a change there, and whether or not the next guy has anybody accountable for it or not, I just want to see something new. I just want to see somebody who is, and you're right, Carroll there are things that you can say that are really clearly the man can coach and motivate, and there's nothing, you would never deny Carroll that. I think sometimes the pushback to having conversations like this is ridiculous. Like I heard somebody say in a different podcast the other day, he accused people such as you and I of saying that Carroll's gone stale, and then made a reference to that being about his age. It's nothing to do with that. I don't think Carroll, the individual, has gone stale because he's 71. I think the Seahawks have gone stale under his leadership. And I would think that way if he was my age, let alone 71. It's not about age. It's about sometimes there's a shelf life on things. And I think his has come now. It's time for somebody else to have a go. It's as simple as that. And the quick fixes we took, this is why it's such a significant rebuild, Adam. They might not have any route to Jalen Carter and Will Anderson, and therefore, what do you do? What is the quarterback situation? I mean, thank God the Seahawks didn't listen to Twitter 6 weeks ago when they were demanding that Geno Smith be paid a $30 million a year contract, because, quite frankly, he's not played worthy of a contract like that in the last sort of 3 or 4 games, maybe longer. But you've got to square that circle. Who's your quarterback? Is Geno Smith capable of taking you to the promised land? Or does it need to be somebody else? Does he have to be the Alex Smith to your future Patrick Mahomes? What are you going to do with the O-line, which still requires some build? The depth of the roster and the quality, it needs time. This is not a quick fix at all. And I just have no confidence that Carroll and his staff are going to be the ones that can, because he's had a good go at this now. He had a reset in 2018. We've had another turn now. They're a 1-5 run. It is just time for me. It is just time. And Hunter says, happy holidays, Rob and Adam. Love the work you do on this channel. Thank you, Hunter. Appreciate the super chat. If you've got any of those, keep them coming in. And yeah, I don't know how many more times I can say it, Adam. I'm just ready to see something different. Why do you think Seahawks fans struggle with that opinion so much? Because if somebody came on this stream right now and said, look, I don't think Pete Carroll should go, and gave a really comprehensive answer, which included footballing reasons, long-term future reasons, if they could actually, I don't know what that argument would be, but if they were to do it, I would say, okay, fair enough. I will take those points on board, may challenge one or two, but would appreciate the others. I don't think we have said anything unreasonable here. I don't think anything unreasonable was said with Jeff a couple of days ago. It reminds me a little bit of the conversation around the Russell Wilson trade, that the minute that you bring it up, people get offended by it. Is every fandom like this? I mean, you're quite close to the sort of the Tottenham Hotspur fandom. Do you see similar things around that? Have you even been guilty of it sometimes yourself? I don't know. Like, what do we see? Is there anything unique, is basically what I'm saying, about the way that some fans seem to take it quite personally the minute you start challenging a future without Russell Wilson?
Well,
without Pete Carroll,
with Spurs, the binary level is about ownership as opposed to managers. But I don't know, because maybe I'm wrong, and maybe people don't want to listen to this, and they want to tune in and listen to us basically reciting what Pete said in the press conference, that if DK just got his foot down, that would have been a touchdown. Like, come on. I mean, for me, I'm thrilled that you invite me onto your show. I love doing it, but it would be intellectually dishonest of me to come on and do that. And look, if people don't want to hear that, and I know they vote with their feet, then fine. But I have a feeling if that's the case, that'll be the whole show taken down, because that does seem to be the view that permeates through the whole thing. But when I read the comments on on the blogs that you write, obviously we're putting our faces on our names to these opinions, but people seem very happy to write in long form stuff that they seem to agree with us on it. And again, I don't think it has to be a negative about Pete Carroll. I think it can be a positive about the future, that we just would like to try something else. And I don't know if you remember when 4 or 5 weeks ago we were told, are we eating crow about Geno Smith and Pete Carroll? And I think I said, let's just pump the brakes on that, because it's not that anything necessarily has happened at that stage to, we're allowed opinions. We were negative. Stuff went well. Fantastic. We were winning. Nothing would make me happier than for us to look like idiots because the Seahawks under Pete Carroll won the Super Bowl. We don't stay up till 5 a.m. on a regular basis to hope that the team loses. And that's the first thing for it. But there does appear to be this sort of, they win, eat crow, you were wrong, or they lose, we were right. It doesn't need to be as binary as that. It's just a case of, we've seen it. It's been 13 years, as you say, of this regime. And I just want to see something different. I just want to see what a different person does with new players. And if they end up being 2-15 next year, unmitigated disaster, I'm not going to turn around and say, well, I didn't want this. I'll happily own the opinion. But I do think that, Zach Taylor was a meme 3 years ago. I think he'll probably go back-to-back Super Bowls. This stuff can change quite quickly. And I do think that we can get a bit sort of ostrichy, head in the sand, and not looking around at what the rest of the league are doing. Like, there are teams that have hired new coaches and turned around in 9 to 12 months into being really good teams. And I just don't see this regime creating a really good team. And that's why we watch, I think.
That is why we watch. And that's all we want. And I think this is the other thing that's lost. That, I don't know, I think it's very easy to just take the position of, I'm going to defend the team and the people running the team, and basically imply that everybody else is either unhinged or has got an agenda to get clicks. We've already established, my YouTube channel does not benefit at all from losses. I want them to win every game so that I get much higher listens and more super chats and all that. It comes with the territory of winning. And when the losers, there's nothing to be gained from talking about this. But we want to have proper serious conversations. We don't want to pull the wool over anybody's eyes because it benefits either in terms of numbers or in terms of finances. So there's no point there.
There are people that fling you super chats after a win just for the sake of it, and I'm not encouraging people to do this. You know, I'm not saying, oh, you know, sling 5, but people do that after a win because they're happy.
Yeah, they feel good.
Yeah.
They're riding the wave of positivity. And so have we. I mean, we've been sat here elated after a game this season, delighted that the Seahawks found a way to win. And that's how we are. I mean, I do like to think that, you know, when it's good, we'll call it good, and when it's bad, we'll call it bad. And what we really want is it good all the time. We appreciate it won't be good all the time, but ultimately we want to win championships. We want to compete for championships. And if it was so hard to do, Adam, this is the thing. So, you know, I think that we're two British guys. I appreciate the fact there's a whole bunch of Americans watching us right now, listening to us talk about their sport. But to bring it sort of back to the Premier League, if I was a fan of, let's say, Everton, I'd have no real justification to demand, why is my team never winning the Premier League? It's just not realistic. But I look at the teams that are at the top of the NFL right now. You know, Buffalo, a catastrophic franchise for so many years, is up there. The Bengals, you know, appallingly run for years, but got to the Super Bowl last year. You know, the Vikings have their ups and downs. The Eagles have gone from being a Super Bowl team to a really bang average, mediocre, sort of almost Seahawks 2022-esque team, to being the cream of the NFL again in no time at all. You know, the Niners go good and bad all of the time. You know, we've seen the Giants go to 2 Super Bowls and win them both against Brady, and then also be really bad. But you can go up and down very, very quickly. I want to watch this team win. You're right, Adam. I mean, look, if anyone ever questions, you know, what are we doing, our thought process, you're right. Sort of staying up to it's 10 o'clock at night on Christmas Eve, and we're sat here talking about a loss to the Chiefs. There aren't many people prepared to do that, frankly, or jump in a sauna that's not switched on in Finland a week ago and you know, bang out 20 mins on a crap loss to the Niners, who I hate losing to. So we do it because we care. We do it because we're passionate. And ultimately, I want to watch a team that I can think, yeah, do you know what? It might not happen this year and it might not happen next year, but you know what? We're on the right path. And I just don't think we're on the right path. I think we're treading water. And this defensive, you have to stick with Carroll because we've never had anybody like him before, and he won a title, and therefore he has to essentially have the keys to this until he walks out now. And I don't think that, and I agree with that super chat we had earlier, Adam. I do think that whether Jody Allen has a strong opinion either way on it, I'm not sure. But I think John Schneider will. And I think John Schneider, if he was being honest, probably thinks, do you know what? I'd like to make a decision now. I think being a GM and never being able to appoint a coach is a bit like, it's a bit like having a sports car and being told you can only go up to 4th gear. You know, you really want to sort of max out the brilliance of that experience. And he's never had the chance to pick his own guy and shape the organization that way. And until last year, I don't think he's had some control. And I do think that the shift towards the Fangio defense and stuff like that is in part inspired because Carroll was told you need to do things differently. I think that was a very serious meeting, despite what people like Greg Bell were saying a year ago about it not being a very important, it was just a run-of-the-mill meeting. That meeting led to serious staff changes, the Russell Wilson trade, and different schematic changes, and a shift in power between Schneider and Carroll. And I don't think we've seen the end of that necessarily. And I, frankly, Adam, nothing would enthuse me more than this week, Pete Carroll saying, do you know what? One last game for the road ahead of that Rams game, and then go out there, go out in a blaze of glory, and walk off into the sunset, and let's go with something else. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, I think, and I don't want to speak for people. I hate doing that, but I do wonder if people think that I mentioned the ostrich head in the sand thing. If a lot of fans look around the league and think, well, if Pete Carroll goes, the only people available are Sean Payton and Vic Fangio. And maybe that puts them off because those are like the head coaches that have been head coaches that aren't currently coaching. But I mentioned to you in like a paracetamol infused ramble of a Twitter message on Wednesday that if you look around all of the teams that are doing really well or have changed themselves in the last 2 to 3 years, basically all of them have a head coach that 12 months before they were hired, no one had heard of. and they were buried in a coaching depth chart somewhere as a coordinator or a run game manager, something. And now they are the names that are going to change and dominate the league. I mean, no one had heard of Mike McDaniel sort of the year before last, and now he's someone that you'd rip your hand off to have him or someone like him as a head coach. And I do think that, it's not our job. People always say, oh, well, you want him gone. All right, who do you want then? Well, that's not my job, because there's people that get paid millions of dollars to know who the next man in is. But I really wouldn't worry about the number of people who could be the next man and the number of them are in the league, because there will be loads of coaches that are really adept to speaking to young people and getting the best out of young people, and know the game like the back of their hand, and have grown up sort of in this Madden era that everyone talks about, of how to play offense and clock management. And I do wonder if a lot of people think that the be careful what you wish for comes from the fact that they don't see the potential head coaches out there, because they only know sort of the guys that are sat on a TV booth, the broadcast.
Yeah, I think there is probably some truth to that. And my answer to who would you like, I think there's loads of answers. If you want to go big and experience, there is, as you just mentioned, Peyton and Fangio are a team, apparently. Go and get them. If you want proven winners and success, then there you go. There's an option for you. But I'm open to going with I think the Gannon in Philadelphia would be interesting. D'Amico, right? I know he doesn't get to bring Nick Bosa, whatever. He's an inspirational guy. He's as Jeff was saying the other day, has led every locker room he's ever been in. There are sort of younger guys, there are older guys. A year ago, Doug Peterson was available a year ago as a free agent, and he's won a Super Bowl. And he's gone to Jacksonville and turned around Trevor Lawrence and Jacksonville Jaguars, which is not easy to do. Frank Reich's a free agent right now. Some people don't like Frank Reich, but he's there. He's been there. He's been part of Super Bowl winning teams in Philadelphia. He's there. So there are options. RJ says, love the show, guys. I want to give you your kudos. You guys have been consistent on your takes. You guys are speaking on how we feel for weeks. I appreciate that, RJ. I appreciate you saying that, and appreciate the super chat as well. I think there are a lot of people who feel this way. There's definitely a lot of people who don't feel this way, and they don't usually watch live. They usually post in the comment section afterwards, or send me tweets. This one from Romeo A57 says, Merry Christmas to you as well, Romeo. Thank you for all of those super chats. I don't really know where they go from here. I mean, I know we've spent a lot of time talking about one topic, Adam, which is obviously Carroll, but I don't know where they go from here. I don't know what the future is at quarterback. I don't know how they're going to improve the trenches without Denver, getting that top 3 pick. I think there's a huge amount of question marks, and I don't like that. I don't like question marks. I think most fans like that. You kind of want to know where you're going. And right now, I kind of feel like I don't know, and I almost feel like, even though Geno Smith is far from the problem, and I'm not one of those people who thinks he's been rubbish and all of that, I just think, how far can he legitimately take you? And if you do end up with a top 5 pick, are you really going to, not take that chance to get a quarterback because Geno Smith, age 32 next year or 33 next year, you're going to sort of put your lot in with him? I mean, is that really what you do? Back Geno Smith to win you a Super Bowl? I mean, it's still a quarterback league. There are so many questions moving forward now, and I just want the season to end so we can start answering some of those.
Look, I mean, we mentioned a couple of weeks ago that the thing I most enjoyed about the last draft cycle was that they didn't piss about. They sat where they were, they took the player that was available, and they plugged the hole in a roster that basically filled a need. And in general, it worked out really well. Maffei, you could say, hasn't worked out as well as you would like, but perhaps, he's a rookie. I think Kenneth Walker is maybe showing that he's the kind of running back that needs a pal in the backfield with him that maybe can do some of the hard yards on first and second down, because I think we're losing a little bit of that explosiveness. And funny enough, Jeff has just said that in the comments, that I think the banger that can sort of chew up 3 yards, 4 yards, and allow Kenneth Walker to bounce outside. But there's a few plays today that he's not trusted his blocks, and he's ended up 4 or 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage, not knowing what to do. But Rob, you know more about the draft than anyone I'm ever likely to speak to. it does strike me with a little bit of trepidation that if they have picks 5, 12, and then what would that be? 37 and 48 for the sake of argument. It's going to be hard to have conviction about who you're taking at that stage, isn't it? Like you're going to mull getting out of those picks because I don't feel outside of the the two defensive tackles, Bijan Robinson and the quarterbacks, if there's any players that you're even that excited for. Anyone's in a dynasty draft, for example, that's looking for receivers. I don't think I've heard one receiver's name as sort of a top level talent coming out. So I am slightly concerned that this is the year with all the picks that they might find themselves in a difficult position to sort of stand in the draft pocket and take the hit per se.
No, I think that's a fair point. I think that the draft is weak in terms of those blue chip talents, and you really do sort of have. I think you can call Jalen Carter a blue chip talent. I think Will Anderson, based on what he did last year, you could make that argument. Not so much in 2022, but still a good player. I think he's just more of a project than people realise, and there isn't that guarantee that he's going to come into the NFL and be great. I think Bijan Robinson is an exceptional player, but he's a running back, and you sort of, how early do you want to take one of those? Michael Mayer at Notre Dame is a very, very good player. He's not quick, but he does sort of have that subtle separation. But everything else about him is a complete game in terms of a tight end. But he's a tight end, same as Bijan Robinson. How early do you want to take those guys? And then you've got the quarterbacks, and that's kind of it. And the quarterbacks are always, and this is the thing with quarterback analysis. People are always looking for almost to sort of nail their colours to the mast on a quarterback and hope that they end up so they can sort of brag about how right they were in hindsight. Every quarterback is a risky pick. I read I think it was in the Seahawks UK Facebook page, someone said you can't take a quarterback, they're too risky. My counter to that would be, go and have a look at the number of defensive line draft busts that have been in the top 10 over the last few years. Every pick is a risk early. There's no such thing. All you can do is sort of weigh up the factors and go with your conviction of whether you believe someone's good. And I think the quarterbacks in this draft have got some ability. None of them are a sure thing, but they have got the potential to be good, and then you've got to develop them, and you've got to take a chance on one of them and stuff like that. So, that's it. It's pretty thin. I mean, look, the chances are, Adam, that if you did end up with, as I think you said, sort of like 5 and 14 or 5 and 12 or something like that, you could just end up with 2 decent but not great players, and that's fine. But you need great. You need some great. I mean, like the Niners are where they are because they have Nick Bosa and George Kittle and Deebo Samuel. You need to find great, and you don't need loads and loads of great. You just need some. And the Seahawks don't necessarily even need to find great in the top 10. I don't think Charles Cross is ever going to be a great offensive tackle, but if Tariq Woolen can be a great cornerback, then fine, it balances it out. As long as you get a contributor and a great player, fine. Doesn't really matter where they're drafted, but that's my concern looking at this draft. That I don't think it's easy to find greatness early in the first round, and in some other drafts you could sort of pick. I'd be banging the table for a few players right now, and it'd be pretty obvious at 5 that, hey, you might not get him, but you might get him, and you don't have that. Instead, we're kind of like, oh crap, I hope they're picking the top 3 because they're going to miss out otherwise. That's not great. Anyway, I hope that people have found it therapeutic to listen to us talking in this way. Because, I mean, that is the one thing that I'll always say about Seattle sports. I don't think there's enough people just having a frank and honest conversation about the situation. I think the autopilot mode for a lot of the people talking about the Seahawks is to always veer on the side of let's hope for the best and not dig into things and not even consider certain topics. Like people just weren't willing to consider discussing the possibility of Russell Wilson being traded. People aren't willing to discuss the possibility that Pete Carroll might not be the coach next year. And I think these are just conversations as sports fans we have to have. And maybe it's different in America, but we have them all the time in England over managers and certain players about whether they're going to stay, whether they're going to go. And I just think it's a really important point to have those conversations. And I think this is an important conversation to have. The Seahawks are 1-5, and their one win was against a crap team full of backups, and they could have lost that. So, look, it's a big couple of weeks coming up that are going to determine quite a lot. I think if they lose next week, then it's going to turn, because the Jets have been awful. And I think if they lose next week and it's 1-6, watch out. Same time though, Adam, I don't really see them losing to the Jets and the Rams. So, I mean, you'd have to play pretty badly next week to lose to that Jets team.
Yeah, I think what you feel today should be the energy that you take into the off season when you're evaluating this team, because I think you couldn't really ask for two better opponents to play against in the next 2 weeks. And look, I think they're going to sort of tumble and trip their way into the playoffs. And I do think that is a point that we can celebrate. I see people saying, "Oh, just tank, go 7-10, get the higher pick." I always have a bit of trepidation about that. I think teams like Cleveland and Detroit and the Jets and whatever have spent years saying, "Oh, just lose these next 2 games so we can have a better draft pick." I do feel that losing breeds losing. So if they make the playoffs, I'll be thrilled. And look, we're all going to sit down and have a great evening watching the Seahawks in the playoffs. Thank goodness for that. That's what we're in this for. But I think what your view on the team is today is what you should ultimately take as a macro view going into the offseason, because I don't think you're going to learn a hell of a lot about this team going into the next 2 games, unless they lose, in which case, there's more problems than we thought.
I think they'll win the next 2 games. And I think that the people who are inclined to argue aggressively in favor of the Carrolls and the stuff like that are going to have an absolute field day. We'll have a field day. We'll say, I can't believe, what an idiot, what a joke that you've had those conversations. They've qualified for the playoffs and everybody expected them to win 3 games when nobody was predicting 3 wins. That's what will happen. That's my prediction for it, and it'll be really irritating. And I hope that we can still have serious conversations if that happens about the future, because I think it's really important. But the fact that the Lions lost and lost badly, and the Giants lost, means that there's a distinct possibility that could happen. Although right now, I mean, the other thing though to remember with that, I guess, is that other teams could come into this. So the Seahawks, are 7-8. If the Packers win, they will also be 7-8. So they could get into the mix. They're not out of this yet, so they could still come into this alongside Detroit, the Commanders, the Giants. The Commanders playing the Niners now. So there's still a possibility that Green Bay could sneak into the playoffs. If they get in as the 7th seed, they're a team that no one will want to face. I think if the Seahawks get there as the 7th seed, could be rubbing their hands.
They'll be queuing up.
Yes. Anyway, look, Merry Christmas to everybody, and have a great one. Several Christmases have been ruined by Seahawks losses on Christmas Eve in my lifetime. This is not going to be one of them. I'm going to get over this pretty quickly and onwards and upwards. Have a great day tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of Christmas Eve over in the States, even though the weather sounds pretty horrendous over there. Hope you stay safe. Hope you have a good time with family and friends. Thank you for all the super chats. Thank you for all of your support this year in growing the channel, and it has grown quite a lot in the last few months. SeahawksDraftBlog.com for more analysis. Adam, always a pleasure. Thank you for giving up your time today as well to join me for this one, and we'll be back after the Jets game to get into all of that in the new year. Until then, have a great Christmas. Bye for now.